This is a layout of the S&P 500 and where value existed in public companies. Back in the 80s, over 80% of the value inside of a company was in tangible assets. It was in inventory, it was in buildings. Today, that's less than 10%. Most of the value inside of a company is intangible. It's IP, it's people. And so, how you're actually leveraging that IP with your people to create value is really how any company literally creates market value. That's shown over and over in the S&P 500. Another one is there's a bunch of generations today in the workforce. So you could rewind time and every single generation complains about the next younger generation. Is like, oh, those Gen Xers, my goodness. And oh my gosh, those millennials, oh, those Gen Zs. Like I'm a millennial. I remember entering the workforce. Everyone thought, wow, we're never going to make it. These millennials are terrible. And now everyone's saying that about Gen Z. But what's different about today is that there are actually 5 generations. That is key. That is new. That's never really been the case before. People are working later into their life. And so there's even more generational separation, but also the way that even just me as a millennial versus a Gen Xer, the generation above me, versus Gen Z, the generation below me, the way that we all grew up is very different than each other, much less from baby boomers and the generation above them, right? Obviously, technology has a huge part to play in this, but there's other factors that come into play as well. In the book, we actually talk about just even something as silly as the use of emojis. How many of you use the thumbs up emoji when you're talking on Microsoft Teams, Slack, text, something like that? Okay, so I do too. But apparently to Gen Z, that is incredibly offensive. Who knew? I know, right? It's even on Zoom. We're all thumbs upping here on Zoom. So like there's small things like that. That's not even just like what you would expect of, mental health, anxiety, all of these like bigger things that are mega trends that you even hear about in the media. It goes all the way down to small things like just the words or the emojis we use create difference of meaning across generations. And so imagine that compared with also the fact that we're even more remote and distributed. So the way that we're communicating is much less in person. So this is a fun chart of Europe by country of how many folks were already working remote and distributed pre-COVID. So you can see it was already on the rise. And then, just put in COVID. And we have so many people who are working together, but they never actually talk in person. Like they haven't met in person. How many of you have worked with somebody that you've never even just met in the flesh? I know, me too, right? Isn't that wild? And that's becoming more and more normal. So how are we supposed to collaborate with each other when we don't have water cooler talks? When we're all on, Zoom or Microsoft Team meetings where you don't have that side conversation that happened to happen in the conference room right before the meeting officially got started. You can't do that on remote calls. You can't do that. You have to find new ways of working together where you work asynchronously or where you have impromptu phone calls. But then, some people prefer that you text them. Other people want a Slack or a Teams message. Other people live in email. Other people are like, just if you ever call me, like that's how I know it's an emergency. And other people are, hey, call me because that's the only way to get a hold of me, right? Everyone has their different preferences of how we collaborate together. Again, just one other mega trend showing collaboration is critical, but it's so complicated today. It's so complicated. Let's talk about individualism. Individualism is not necessarily terrible within and of itself, but like pick yourself up by your bootstraps, like self-empowered autonomy, those types of things in especially in American culture are not bad. They actually lead to a lot of good things. When we say individualism, we are talking about a hyper self-focus. There is increasing data coming out that we don't have as many friends. In the 90s, the average American had, and this is American data, but it's a global trend. The average American had 3 close friends. Before COVID, it was less than 1 per average American, right? That was before COVID. And as you can see, this chart here is showing you how much time people spend alone versus with friends or significant others and companions. It was already trending more and more towards we spend time alone. And then, of course, COVID really hit that. And even after COVID, we're not seeing that this actually come back down and more friend time go back up yet. It has corrected a little bit more. This chart's a bit outdated, but it hasn't gotten back to pre-COVID levels. People are more and more alone. spending our time alone, spending our time not communicating directly with other people. We're watching TV, we're on social media. Even this trend holds true across generations, across races, across socioeconomic status, across married, unmarried. Even married people are spending less time together despite their relational status. So our culture is moving towards we're alone, we're okay with being alone. We don't communicate as much with other people, even outside of work. So what is the impact of that on communicating at work? Political divisiveness. How many of you are so excited it's an election year? I'm not. And there was this super interesting study that came out of Harvard on it took census data and paired that with the 180 million registered voters in America. And it broke that down by exact street address and where do people of different parties live in relation to each other. And then they heat mapped that on this map. Yellow means less than 10% of the people you are in a neighborhood with are of a different political party than you. And most of our country, as you can see, is in the yellow. The red is actually not even like high interactivity. It's actually still pretty low. I think it's like less than 40% of the people in your neighborhood are a different party. And this quote I thought was really interesting that came out of that study. Most Democrats and Republicans live in levels of partisan segregation that exceed what scholars of racial segregation consider highly segregated. So back in, Jim Crow days, you were more likely to see someone of the other color skin than today you are to cross paths in your neighborhood with somebody of a different party than yours. We're growing in this trend of, hey, the way that we believe, we cannot talk about it with other people because we simply don't run into people who have different beliefs. We are surrounded by echo chambers of people who think like us, who have the same yard signs as us, who have the same belief of what brings prosperity versus what brings division, belief of what's the best way to raise the future generation, what's the best way to, all of these things that come with our political identities. We are not living around people who think differently. Actually, after an election year, this is a story we share in the book a couple of years ago here. One of my colleagues said, oh my gosh, I can't imagine being married to somebody who voted differently than I just did. And my husband and I almost always cancel out each other's vote. And we joke about it like, oh, Cody, you don't need to go to the polls today. I'll vote for you. You know what I mean? Because it's like, why would we both go? We often cancel each other out. And we both vote across the lines. So it's not like, I'm this party, he's that party. We both are just like really trying to understand the issues and vote for what we think is the best thing, right? And I actually really love that a lot, that we love each other, we care for each other, we're forced to live together, we're contractually bound, and we have children together, right? We've got to talk about life. And I think that that's such a sad thing for our country and for our world. These trends are global, that people don't have to talk to somebody that they care about who thinks differently than them on something so core to your beliefs of, what brings prosperity, what is the best for the future economy for our kids, that you don't have to talk to somebody who thinks differently than you on that. How do you think that bleeds over into the workplace? In the workplace, we're not talking about, usually we're not talking too much about politics, although of course that bleeds in, especially in years like this year. But we are talking about what's going to be the most successful thing for my department. We are like living in either silos and division and territorialism, or collaboration and sharing information and trying to learn from each other. It's not exactly the same or as personal as talking politics, but if you can't in your personal life have a practice of listening to different perspectives, of course that bleeds over into work. And marketing saying, darn sales, we send them so many leads, they do nothing with them. And sales saying, darn marketing, they're not sending us good leads, like that's just one of many examples of silos in organizations. All right, last one, AI, especially, but all tech, right? There is this huge explosion of tech. And as Scott will talk about in a moment, that happened far previous to 2022 with generative AI. It was already a massive exponential trend of technology. But of course, even more so with AI and all that has come in the last 18 months since OpenAI launched ChatGPT, there is this huge growth in there's a huge knowledge gap, obviously, but there's also, if you talk to learning and development leaders, 91% of them say one of the most important things to now focus on with AI, other than upskilling for understanding and using AI, one of the most important things is human skills. It's how do we communicate? How do we collaborate? Interpersonal skills, self awareness. Because if AI can come in and automate processes, you better point that AI at the right place to do that, right? You need people who are understanding the strategy, the market, the customer, the human side of things, who can then come together, share their information with each other, and solve the right problems so that they can point that technology in the right direction. A story that I really like to think about around this is pre-AI. There was a guy who headed up stores for Apple. How many of you ever been to an Apple store? It feels great. It's so clean. Everyone looks so smart. Oh my gosh, it's so delightful. People just go hang out inside of Apple stores. They just show up there because it feels nice to be there. You walk by it in the mall, you want to be at that store. So the same guy who started the first retail store at Apple was left Apple, and like after he grew that network, he left there and he went to J.C. Penney. And I'm sure you all might know the story of J.C. Penney. He came into J.C. Penney and he said, "You know what? We're going to do exactly what worked at Apple. We are going to make these stores cool. People are going to want to just come and hang out at J.C. Penney. So we don't want to target, like discount shopping. We're going to get rid of coupons. We're just going to make J.C. Penney's great places to be." And within a year, JCPenney actually failed worse than any other retail store has ever failed because they totally lost sight of the human side of JCPenney. The customer, the employees, all that had led to its success, they were just like, hey, take this algorithm of what worked at Apple, plug it in at JCPenney. And it was the biggest catastrophic retail failure. Now, AI can come in and reintroduce playbooks wherever, but it is the people, only the people who can really understand that human side and make the right decisions and point the playbooks in the right direction. All right. Any thoughts, questions before we move on to talking about what you all came for today, which is academic theory?
We do
Yeah,
have a thought in the chat from Elisa. She says we lost a large account to AI to create a training program, but just heard we won them back due to the human element.
100%. Yes, Elisa, that is amazing. I'm so glad to hear that for you.
Yeah, it's a great example of what Kirsten's describing. And this phenomenon that we're describing now, this concept of when the human element should be aligned with the technology, it is documented historically in what is called the socio-technical theory. And just to tell a few stories about this phenomenon, if you really look at, for example, the manufacturing era, and that was the first attempt to incorporate technology, not the technology we see today, but technology nonetheless that was amazing back then in terms of, for example, creating the Model T Ford to be able to know what tools and what efficiencies to eke out within a large scale production facility was mind-blowing at the time. And they incorporated this technology, and more or less there was some degree of congruence between the human element. There was some degree of treating people like machines and treating them like tools, but there was over time a little bit more fairness and equity in there. But other attempts in other industries to include technology didn't work so well. The technology had advanced well beyond what the human element was capable of. For example, in the coal mines, instead of using old school methods, they started using machines for extraction. And those machines down underneath the earth were loud, and it was impossible for all the coal miners to communicate, to coordinate, to work together collaboratively. And so, although we incorporated these amazing pieces of technology that theoretically should have extracted more value or created more value for the companies, it actually did the opposite because the people involved weren't aligned with the technology that was in place. So it actually made it worse. And so over time, this idea of making sure that we have caught up with technology is reoccurring. And we're in another era where technology has pushed way ahead of us. And the ideal should be to figure out how to leverage the best practices and the tools that we currently have in a way that's actually adding value, not making it harder to work together, which is something that Cloverleaf is doing, and we'll talk about more in a second. So what we just described, for example, in this Model T area, that's the industrial economy. And in that industrial economy, scientific management was reigning supreme. It was figuring out efficiencies. Let's literally calculate how long it takes to move from point A to point B. And over time, we evolved into a service economy. And in a service economy, what you started to see was the rise of what would be called the transformational leader, the person that could stand up and be inspirational, motivational, offer idealized influence, and get people excited about this mission of serving customers and helping the world by doing some type of service that was aligned with their business model. That then gave way to what we know as the knowledge economy. And in a knowledge economy, all of the best practices are in the person's head. So what we want to do is figure out how to get flow of information and flow of ideas. In that type of economy, the new latest and greatest approach to leadership or influencing others became empowering leadership. How can we get the most out of these people by giving them the autonomy, giving them the space to be creative and free flowing in their ideas and working together? But now we've evolved to the era that we're currently in, this idea of a networked or collaboration economy. More businesses than ever are using this approach where they have a core competency and they do it really, really well. And they either outsource or they partner with everybody in their business ecosystem in order to create value or create profits. In this type of society, the new latest and greatest approach to leadership is what's called shared leadership, also called distributed leadership or collective leadership. What this entails is the artful claiming and granting of leadership roles or whatever your role is within your team in order to maximize whatever the group needs at any one point in time. So it's not about a singular person that's coming in and saying, I'm in charge, or I'm going to be transformational, I'm going to be empowering. Everybody is a leader that can add value in different ways so that we understand, wow, I am the best person for this moment. I need to step up. Or, wow, this other person is the best to be in this role at this moment. So I'm going to step back. That type of approach is trickier and harder, but that is the era that we're in terms of the ideal approach to leadership or influencing others for this era that we find ourselves in today. So what does this mean as we start to move towards, well, what should organizations actually do to leverage what we know about technology and the changes that we're seeing from a socio-economic perspective? Well, number one, an ideal organizational philosophy that Cloverleaf certainly believes in, and I think a lot of the people that we're serving and partnering with, such as Blanchard, that also believes in, is this idea of individual talent is out. Right? It's like finding a needle in a haystack. And if you're only looking for individual performers, you're going to get individual performance potentially at the cost of group performance or team performance or organizational performance. What we really should be focused on is individuals that understand who they are, they understand their strengths, they understand their potential values, their expertise, and their background and how to leverage it, but they're able to operate within a shared leadership type of environment where they know when to contribute and how to contribute in the best way possible, right? So finding the outstanding performer from an individual perspective, that's not as helpful, is instead focusing on the group talent at large. All right. Philosophy number two, everyone has some value. We are all unique. And a lot of times, I think organizational behavior over the years has tried to categorize, this is what we need right now, or this is best practices, and this is the ideal team member or the ideal leader. And they look at it in generalities. And in a way, that's also potentially detrimental because it hides the fact that in reality, everybody's unique and everybody can add value in different ways. And so by having this philosophy of recognizing you, be the authentic you that you can possibly be, and we'll figure out what that best value is. And we will either plug you into the right place or coach you into figuring out how to use that value better, or figuring out how we can all collectively make sure we're making the most of everybody's potential value together. That's the new mindset or philosophy that makes sense in the era we find ourselves in today. Organizational philosophy number 3, from individual to group productivity. There's a lot of information out there about how to be productive, effective, efficient from an individual standpoint. And if you really think about a lot of the ways that we do our performance development and our performance management, it's about looking at how did you do individually? Why would we not be looking at what we really care about, which is how are you doing as a team member? How are you doing as an organizational citizen, as a member of this collective? So the philosophy is not how well are you performing individually, how well are you performing in terms of your contributions to your team, right? So that's an important shift as well.
And you can see examples of that, even in how people are trying to do comp today, of moving from bonuses that are individual based versus like whole company based. Both of those have their challenges. Now organizations moving more towards, how do you do team-based bonuses? How do you do team-based comp where it's something you directly have control over, not similar to the organizational performance where, people are like, why, how do I move that needle? But it's also not incenting just the individual to then do what's best for them and not think about the collective group that they impact.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things happening there.
Yeah. I've also seen when people are doing performance development and performance management, they're not focused on just individual components. They're actually looking at how well did you engage in information sharing, in collaboration, in coaching, in mentoring, all these more other focused phenomenon. That's becoming something that people are grading and evaluating and encouraging rather than just individual. So it's happening at every level.
Okay. We can't talk about collaboration without talking about conflict. So Patrick Lencioni has this great spectrum here where he talks about conflict. There's constructive conflict, there's destructive conflict, and there's kind of this perfect tension in the middle. There is a level of discomfort that is very healthy for an organization, for marketing and sales to say, hey, are you getting me the right quality of leads? And are you actually using those leads? Or for customer success and product to say, hey, our customers are upset about this thing. Can you build it? And hey, we're building this way. Help us learn from the customer, right? Like there's tension everywhere inside of organizations. There's room for silos. There's, the research arm and the output arm. There's constant tension. We have to be learning from each other. You have to understand what will work well on the manufacturing line versus what will sell well in the industry, right? How do you have people be able to bring those different perspectives together and constructively debate them? Because it's never a clear answer. And not one party should ever win. It should always be, we're trying to find the middle ground here. Something that we talk about a lot inside of Cloverleaf is we have one of our 5 core values is called genuine teammate. And we define it in these 2 ways. We create a space of authentic relationships where each person can grow in understanding ourselves and others. So we want people to get, for example, constructive feedback of, hey, Scott, the way that you just did this in that presentation was fantastic. Do that again next time. And also that helps Scott get to know himself and what he is good at. And we should also do the second part of our definition here, which is we face challenges with candor that honors the value intrinsically inside of each person. So like Scott said earlier, of all the organizations we talk to, the ones that are the best at collaboration hold this philosophical belief that every single person has value. So if someone is low performing, that doesn't mean they're low value. It means we haven't figured out how to tap their value, right? And sometimes, an organization can't tap someone's right value. They have to find a new place to provide their best value. So it doesn't mean kumbaya, everyone's great, but it means everyone does have value. And so when there are challenges that come up, you listen to each other, you speak with candor, you can be transparent and open and honest. And so to talk about this with our team, we kind of noticed, we use this tool called Bonusly. It's a place where people can go and give shout outs to each other, like, hey, Scott, great job on that presentation, and like hashtag a value with it. And people actually get money out of it. They win prizes and get real cash money out of it. It's super fun. We love it. And I noticed that people were misusing this value of genuine teammate. They would say, hey, Scott, thank you so much for stepping in on that project that was going south. What a genuine teammate. Hey, Scott, thank you so much for taking the garbage out. Genuine teammate. And I realized, okay, none of those things are genuine teammate. Those are just, hey, you took out the garbage, like you did something that nobody else wanted to do. That makes you like a team player, but not a genuine teammate, right? And so we started to do education with our team every quarter on what does it really mean to be a genuine teammate. And we created this 2x2 where we talked about, hey, you know, we like to celebrate each other here at Cloverleaf. We are really good at accepting each other and celebrating each other and saying, high five, good job. Where we notice we're not so good is when something goes wrong, really being able to talk to each other transparently and openly about why did it go wrong? What could somebody else have done to help you be more successful? Where did somebody drop the ball? Are you comfortable challenging each other? And what we really kind of picked up on is we live in a cancel culture. So like there really our culture kind of lives on a spectrum only between these two quadrants where you can be, hey, you highly accept me, you never challenge me, you like me as I am, you think I am great, or I'm going to cancel you. Like, or you don't accept me. And so you are the problem. You are wrong. And so how that plays into feedback at work is people are afraid to give each other feedback. They're like, well, you know, maybe I saw it wrong. Maybe everything should be fine. Maybe I should adjust my expectations. Or no, that person is terrible. But if I ever told them that the thing they did was wrong, then they would, you know, feel like I'm rejecting them, because that's the culture that we live in. That's the pop culture that we live in with cancel culture, right? And so we've had to do a lot of training for people on how do we get you to this upper right quadrant where you can accept me and to be for my growth, to want the best thing for me, you actually will challenge me because I have room to grow and I want to grow and I want you to speak that like into me. And also, I have the same belief about you. I like you. You're capable of so much, and I'm going to help you see things that you don't yet see. A story of how this played out departmentally is we had to internationalize our product. Do you know anything about internationalizing a software product? Oh my goodness. No fun, so much work, forever and ever. And I head up product, and the person who heads up our customer success, she and I had a lot of tension over this. We talked about it for well over a year, on her saying, hey, we have to do this, and me saying, hey, this is going to slow down every other way that we are serving our customers. Maybe we should just focus on English speaking countries for the next few years. And the way that she was able to, she won. and I think it was the right thing. She actively listened to me. She showed me that she understood my points, and she shared her points with me. She brought down my guard by actually saying, hey, I've heard you say these are the hard parts. And I also need you to understand, this is what I'm hearing from the customer. This is what I'm facing. This is what's happening with my team. This is what's happening out in the industry with our customers. And because we were able to have that, we listen to each other, we have a high acceptance for each other, and also we need to consider some hard, uncomfortable information together. We were able to come to a really great solution where now Cloverleaf is internationalized and available to people all over the world. Do you guys experience this difficulty in companies? There's also the inverse. We've talked to so many companies that actually live in this high challenge, low acceptance. It is, here is what the business needs. You are either doing it or you are fired. Like there's no room for, hey, you have your unique strengths. Hey, you have your unique way of seeing things. You do what I say, or this is not the right place for you. And people end up checking themselves at the door, bringing just enough of themselves to get their checklist done for the day, but not the side of themselves that sees new opportunities, not this side of themselves that feels safe trying new things and testing new things. There's no psychological safety. Everyone is too stressed. Have you guys experienced either one of these more than the other?
I think some of it too depends on, like, at my last company, I was really fortunate in that I had, 3 different managers in my time there because I was changing roles, but um we were all working in that empowered quadrant at that level. I'm pretty sure above them, like my managers were kind of like filtering the brunt of that stressed
Yeah.
up. So, was definitely part of high performing teams, but not all the teams in the company were high performing.
That is such a good point, and I'm really glad you said that, Jessica, because what we see is when it comes to culture, when it comes to collaboration, yes, there is a top-down, bottoms-up, and in-between factor to all of it. You can have a high-performing team like you got to experience within a toxic culture. You can have a high-performing company with a couple of low-performing teams. Every single individual impacts what the culture is going to be on that specific team, especially the leader. And like you got to experience a leader protecting you from the pressures out there so that you can be high performing. All right, Scott, let's talk about technology in all of this collaboration.
Well, let's do it. So the role of technology in improved collaboration. We talked about some of these trends in both collaboration and some of these trends in technology, but how can we really weave the two together? One example that I'm sure many of you are familiar with is what's called the backseat effect. Anytime you learn something, you're given some information, you're working through something, whether it's at work or for it's just your own growth, development, etc., there is this backseat effect in that as time goes on, as time elapses, you can recall less and less and less of the information that you've been presented. As someone who has taught thousands and thousands of undergrads over the years, this is very depressing because I have no idea how much they've actually remembered of everything that we've talked about. And really, this has been in not just education literature, but also leadership and development and organizational behavior at large, is recognizing that we should be leveraging the technology that we have in order to get away from this backseat effect and instead figure out how to give people the right amount of information at the right time and in the right medium. And when you can do that, you can significantly increase recall. And not just recall, like I remember what I was being told about what I should do in this situation, but it's also about self-regulation. You actually you have a higher likelihood of changing your behavior in the moment for what makes sense given the situation that you have. So technology really can be a good platform for ensuring that we get rid of this backseat effect and delivering insights that people will remember, pay attention to, and leverage in the future.
With all of this importance of collaboration, how do we actually help people learn how to collaborate better? There's all these mega trends pushing against people knowing how to collaborate. And so there's this huge growing importance on human skills, like we talked about with AI, but it's even beyond just the growth of AI. Talent leaders, even C-suites, executives, even from the board level, are seeing more and more the importance of collaboration and how people work together, which is why they're investing in great programs such as Blanchard. It's why they're investing in, assessments, like I said, my experience was with Myers-Briggs and StrengthsFinder or Clifton Strengths. People know that value is created in how you work together. And so organizations are trying to figure out, how do we help people do this better? And what we've figured out is that a lot of really good efforts out there to educate, like my example of assessments. I didn't know the difference between TJ, P, I, F, all of those alphabet soup. And so I just had the backseat effect of what I was learning as a manager trying to lead my team better. Technology can come in and take all the great research and help people actually learn it in a way that they can apply it and they can truly develop and grow and become better collaborators.
Yep. Perfectly well said. And here is a good summary, I think, in terms of 3 action points to consider when trying to make sure that we can leverage technology appropriately for collaboration. The first one, which we're touching on a little bit in terms of getting the right amount of information in the right place, is this idea of nudges, also called metacognitive prompts in some of the literature, or these micro nudges, where we know that there's a lot of information out there. There's information can be overwhelming. We also know, based upon what's called social information processing theory, that we can only retain so much information at any one time and get it into long-term memory. But by focusing on micro-learning and coming back to it consistently and have this scaffolding effect, a little bit of information, digest, a little bit more information, digest, and going on and on and on, that actually allows for appropriate retention of insights. So this approach to nudges or metacognitive prompts can be very helpful. And this other part is not just looking at self, but also other focused information. And being able to recognize that everybody adds value in different ways. Everybody's unique, not looking for individual talent, thinking about it in terms of group talent, taking a step back and recognizing that we're trying to focus on creating an ideal collective. We can't assume that people are similar, right? Everybody is a snowflake. Everybody is a really complicated combination of characteristics, whether it be traits, strengths, motivational drivers, cultural preferences. Everything under the sun makes us unique, right? It's not all or nothing where we're high or low on one thing. So the more granular we can get and more personalized we can get and really knowing how people operate, the better we can do as a group. The way I like to think of it is that ideally we had an automated instruction manual that we could deliver to somebody and say, you want to know how to work with me? Here's everything you need to know, right? So this focus on being able to understand everything and anything about other people, but in a way that is easy to digest. And then finally, getting it in the flow of work and being action oriented. Right now, learning happens best when it is not separate, but it is tied into our day-to-day experiences. For example, co-op or internships is the ideal way that people learn how to apply the theories that they've learned while they're in school. The same thing applies when we're out of school and we're in the workforce with understanding what to do on the job. You learn in the moment, right? You are experiencing something right now. You have a problem with a client right now. You're dealing with a conflict with a colleague right now. To be able to have insights about that specific experience, given that context, that's what's going to help you learn and grow the most, right? So it's in the flow of work and it's something actionable and specific that you can try and apply right then. So the more actionable and personalized and contextualized that our insights can be, the better for overall learning and growth. So those are the big three for how technology can really be leveraged for collaboration.
That's all we've got. If you want to see how we have brought all of this together in technology, we invented automated coaching, which is where we take all the great data behind assessments and we push it to you in your flow of work, just like everything Scott Dust just said up here. We do nudges that's focused on self and others, and it's in the flow of work and it's action oriented. So you'll get tips on yourself and the people that you work with emailed to you, sent to your Microsoft Teams or Slack. It'll read your calendar, help coach you on the people you're going to meet with based on who you are, how you're wired, and the same thing about them, what's unique and different about them. So if you'd like to test out a free trial, this QR code will take you there.